Hey, I'm Bob Osborne, the Director of Church Health for EFCA West, and want to welcome you to this seminar about raising up leaders in normal-sized churches. You know, one of the things, let me just start out. A few years ago, probably 5-6 years ago, I think Dave and I first met. I had gone over across the other side of the Colorado River from Bullhead City to beautiful Laughlin. Beautiful is in quotes, but beautiful Laughlin, and attended a reunion from my former employer. And I thought, well, while I'm there, I'll just shoot across the river and say hello to Dave, who's pastoring the EFCA church there in Bullhead City. And so I shot over there, and I was delighted to spend some time with Dave. I have come to really appreciate his ministry and just him as a person. One of the things that really stood out as we have talked over the years is just that Dave's knowledge and interests are far and wide. He knows a lot about a lot of things. I appreciated his, if I remember his education story right, there's a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in some organizational leading or management. Then there's an MDiv, and then there's a DMin thrown in, and just all these different kinds of topics, just as kind of the way Dave Arnold thinks. It's just a clue into how Dave Arnold thinks. And so I think you're in for a great time today. Dave's been pastoring the EFCA Church City Bible Church in Bullhead City now since about 2010, if I remember correctly. So about 11 years in, and maybe Dave, you can, we haven't really rehearsed or cleared your program here. So I'm assuming you'll tell us just a little bit about what's unique in Bullhead City, and that's part of your program. So without further ado, first of all, thanks for joining us. And Dave Arnold, take it away.
Bob, thank you so much for your kind words. I'm just so appreciative of this opportunity to share. Just to give you a heads up, I'm going to probably, if you're a podcast person, I'll be going at 1.5 to go through some of the material, because I want to give plenty of time at the end to have questions, to engage in conversation. If questions come up, use that chat feature and put them in there as you go. If you're worried about, man, I'm going to forget that question, just put it in the chat box. And my goal is to cover what we're going to talk about in about 40 to 42 minutes if possible, and then have a question answer time and just to share that information with you. Also, Soshi was so kind that the notes that I'm going to be referring to, you can access them on the link to the Zoom link. And then there's a section that says notes. So we'll be sharing that as well. If you're not a note taker, and you just feel free to kind of just engage and listen, and then you can download those later to have them. So I am a pastor at City Bible Church in Bullhead City, Arizona. Bullhead City is located where Arizona, California, and Nevada meet, right on the Colorado River. In the summer, it's between us and Death Valley is the hottest place in America. In the winter, it is windy and, in the 50s, so it's a little bit nicer to live there. We're right across from Laughlin, Nevada, which is a casino community. So one of the ways I describe Bullhead City is we are Las Vegas without the money. Most of the folks that live in our community work over in the casinos, or they work service industry. So we are a replant church. We replanted in 2010 with the EFCA after a church split happened with this church previously. I became the senior pastor at that time. So let me share just a little bit about Bullhead City so you understand the context in which we minister. The per capita income in Bullhead is 23% lower than the national average. The median household income is 28% lower than the national average. Unemployment rate is usually 8% higher than the national average. And the poverty rate is 28% higher than the national average. So to give you very blue collar, service dependent. So as you can imagine, COVID has just been crushing in some ways for our community. When the casino shut down, 8,000 people lost their job in one day, just perspective locally. The other piece I would say is only 13% of folks that live in Bullhead City have a bachelor's degree or higher. So this is U.S. News and World Report said that this part of, they took Arizona and a couple other cities to make them a metropolitan area, that this is probably the least educated area in the country in terms of higher education. So that's a factor. Another piece is 78% of folks that live in Bullhead City identify themselves as being religiously unaffiliated. So they would put themselves in the nones. On only 8.58% of Bullhead City residents would say they're an evangelical or a mainline Protestant. So this is very postmodern, post-Christian, biblically illiterate. When I stand up to communicate, I can't tell you how many times people said that's in the Bible, or I never knew that was even there. So just cannot assume that anyone is there has any background in the scripture. So that's kind of the background. How we came to where we're at as a church in terms of developing leaders is, we were kind of joking before, a lot of folks, when you talk about the idea of hiring pastoral staff or people moving to such a community, Bullhead City is not a hot spot for people to want to move to. Bullhead City is a place where people want to get out of as soon as possible. So as we began the process of restarting the church and developing leaders, it was very much, I'll use this phrase, organic. And then as we continue to grow as a church, it was like, we need to take what we do intuitively and we need to systematize it, because as Andy Stanley has talked about, if you don't know why you're successful, when you're successful, when things are working well, you're not gonna be able to fix it when it gets broken. So we began the process of really putting down in systems and on paper what we were doing organically that we didn't realize it was just something we were doing with the folks that restarted the church. And that launched the process that put us to what we refer to as apprenticing community. Now, I am a reading nerd. I read a lot of books. So if I was to give you 3 books that really help encapsulate what we're going to talk about, one book is called No Silver Bullets by Daniel M. And this is in the notes. This is a great book on leadership development and discipleship. Then a book called Transformational Discipleship is a great book. There's a companion book also called Transformational Churches. This was done by Lifeway. They did research about how people develop and grow and mature spiritually. And they found 8 specific characteristics of people that grow and mature spiritually. So this is a great book on that. And a third book that we're going to talk about is called The Leadership Pipeline. This is a business book, but it's amazing how so many business books have biblical principles. And you know, the trend in the 90s was, organizations need to demonstrate servant leadership. And Christians are like, yeah, that's kind of Jesus, you know, but so a lot of times there's great principles in there. And so as we were developing kind of our discipleship program or leadership development, we wanted to put it in a system and a structure that we'd be able to communicate with folks. And I just want to share a couple other things too. One of the things that we discovered in some of my backstory is I did not grow up in the church. I became a follower of Jesus when I was 24 because in college, some people that loved Jesus loved me, even though I made fun of them all the time. So I say that to say I don't have a background in church. So I didn't come to church with like the Baptist way or the Presbyterian way or the Anglican way. I came just really like, okay, what do the scriptures say? Now, the danger is I could run over tradition. But the positive is I felt like for me personally, it freed me just to look at how we do church. I mean, how do we do church? How did Jesus disciple people? And what does discipleship even mean? And one of the things when you read leadership research or you read about discipleship, one of the things that really became apparent, and I think intuitively we know this, is that there is a difference between how the Enlightenment and Western thinking impacted discipleship. And what really happened is discipleship and Western culture really became about content transfer or content acquisition. In other words, spiritual maturity was, okay, do you know your doctrine? Do you know your theology? Do you have that memorized? And those are all good things. I have a D-Min, and so I'm all about theology and doctrine. But when we look at Jesus, this idea that he took a group of people, and I'm sure they talked about the Old Testament, and I'm sure that they engaged in the scriptures that they had at that time. But it was so much of, watch me do this. Now I want you to partner with me with what I'm doing, and now you're going to do it. For example, the feeding of the 15,000, you feed them. The disciples, what do you mean we feed them? It was very much this process of this kind of this idea of apprenticeship. And just, I think the shift that happened culturally is we went from this idea of life on life, of not just being content, but being about your heart and your hands. And in the Enlightenment and Western society, it became much more about content acquisition. And the problem is that if you develop competency, to use a word, instead of character, it's a recipe for disaster. I mean, just look at what we have seen in our culture, in our country, and in churches where incredibly gifted leaders that had competency, but their character was behind, and how they have burned out and the damage that has caused. So just to share really this idea of apprenticing, and let me give you one other quick picture to kind of biblically back this thought. When you think of Moses and you read through Moses taking the Jewish people up to the edge of the promised land, you see this guy Joshua always with Moses, always with Moses. Joshua went with Moses to get the 10 commandments. In the book of Numbers, you see Moses in the tent of the meeting, and he's pleading on behalf of the Jewish people. And then Moses leaves, and there's this little statement, but Joshua, the son of Nun, remained behind in the tent, because Joshua couldn't get enough of being with the Lord. But Joshua was with Moses all the time. He was constantly with him, and he was apprenticed by Moses. And you see Joshua equipped and empowered when Moses can't go into the promised land. Moses hands the reins of leadership over to Joshua, and it's Joshua that leads them into the promised land, because Moses reproduced himself through Joshua, and he replaced himself. Then you have Joshua lead the Jewish people into the promised land. But what does Joshua not do? You don't hear anyone around Joshua. And then you get the book of Judges, and what happens? That generation dies, a new generation comes up, they don't know the Lord, and then you have the train wreck that's the book of Judges. So even in the Old Testament, you see this idea of apprenticing community: Moses, Joshua, Elijah, Elisha, in this concept. So a couple things before I jump into the specifics. The connection between discipleship and leadership development. And we talk about discipleship, really a definition that we use is the process of helping people become more like Jesus in their character and in their conduct and in their competency. So those three pieces. Discipleship is a requirement for leadership development, as competency without character is a recipe for disaster. However, while leadership development may be the result of discipleship, not every person who's engaged in discipleship will become a leader. So another way to say it this way: every leader should be spiritually mature, but not every spiritually mature person is going to be a leader. Does that make sense? So when we start talking about this idea of a pipeline and a pathway, I'm going to use these terms in a couple of minutes. The goal isn't just to push everybody through this process that every single person is going to become the next senior pastor. The goal is to move everybody on the process to become more like Jesus. And then as you're moving on that process to spiritual maturity, you're going to identify and apprentice people that demonstrate the character and competency that you can reproduce and that they can ultimately replace you. Does that make sense? So that's where we're going with this. So let me talk about what that looks like as a church. I know I'm talking really fast, so thank you for your patience. So this idea of what we're going to talk about, apprenticing community, is how we describe it here at City Bible Church. This comes from, again, we didn't make it up on our own necessarily, but really it incorporates the research that I talked about from transformational discipleship and from No Silver Bullets, the research that Lifeway did. And it also incorporates a framework of this idea of a leadership pipeline. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to screen share that here in a second. So this idea of a apprenticing community, it involves three different components, in 4 stages. And I'm going to show you a picture here in a second. So how we communicate that flows right out of our mission, our vision, our values, and our strategy. So a key part of communicating and engaging people is to tie the mission, vision, values, and strategy to this process of developing leaders and discipleship. So at City Bible Church, our mission, and we say this every Sunday, if you come to church or you watch us online, the first thing you hear is, welcome to City Bible Church, where our mission is that we're a city within a city that's striving to reveal and reflect Christ as we love and serve the city. Now we welcome the new people, and then we'll talk about our vision as a church is that we desire to help lead our community on a journey towards a growing relationship with Jesus. And then the strategy that we have is that we want everyone who attends to be investing and inviting those around us to join us on this journey, which is another way to talk about apprenticing community, to join us on this journey towards a growing relationship with Jesus. And we ask for 3 specific things. So what is our strategy? Our strategy for apprenticing community involves investing their time in addition to being a part of a corporate worship gathering, in a community group, investing their talents, serving on a ministry team, and investing their treasure in a way that reveals and reflects the generosity of Jesus. So that's really the strategy. So think of it, and I don't mean this as a slam or a disrespect, but I've had conversations with folks, and I think sometimes in Western church world, we think of discipleship like a buffet. In other words, we need to provide programs. We need to have this program and that program, and we have all these different programs. We have to have all these ministries for men, women, children, and those in themselves aren't bad things. But as our culture moves more and more busy, what unintentionally happens is, I think, as Francis Chan has pointed out, we can create an environment where people view church as a spiritual buffet where they're there to consume spiritual goods and services. So in other words, what spiritual goods and services are you going to give me to consume? And then they approach church, and I think we've all had these conversations. Well, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have a women's ministry, men's ministry? Do you do these things? Do you have an arts ministry? And those are not bad things. But then all of a sudden, subtly, we're teaching folks that come to church that church is a place where I get spiritual goods and services that I consume, and that's where it begins and ends. And I think moving people to the idea, and we use this language, we want to move people on a journey from being a consumer, and a consumer can be someone who's searching and shopping for answers when it comes to Jesus and the Bible. And every one of us on this call, we were consumers at one point. We were trying to figure out the whole Jesus thing. So there's nothing wrong with being a consumer. We just don't want to leave people at consumers. We want to move them from being a consumer to being an owner, to own a genuine, authentic relationship with Jesus, then move them on that spiritual journey to move from being an owner to being an investor, that they're investing in others, they're investing in the mission. And so that's kind of the process that we talk about with that. One other thing I think that would be helpful for you is the values that we try to pour into our church is that we desire to faithfully and lovingly proclaim the life-changing message of Jesus. We desire to faithfully create irresistible and engaging environments with excellence. And we desire to faithfully and joyfully team up to invest in others. So every ministry team that we have, the value we want that team to be, whether it's our first impressions team, whether it's our children's ministry, student ministry, we want to faithfully and lovingly proclaim the life-changing message of Jesus. We want to create engaging environments with excellence, not perfection, but we're striving to create these engaging environments. And we want to team up faithfully and joyfully. We want it to be fun. We want it to not feel like a duty, but a delight to team up together to serve. So very team-based ministry. So let me show you what that looks like. And I'm going to share here. Hopefully we'll do this and it will go well. So here is what it would look like. This is a leadership development pipeline. So I'm going to you can download this as well. You have 4 different levels on this. So you have the average person who's a volunteer. Then you have a person who serves on a team, they become a ministry team leader. Then you may have a person who becomes a director. So for example, if you have a pastor of student ministries, and that pastor of student ministries oversees junior and senior high ministry, but underneath that pastor, you may have a junior high ministry team leader, a senior high ministry team leader, and then you have your senior leadership, your elders, your deacons, your senior pastors. So that's kind of the 4 different steps, just to give you an overview. And we use this to help people that are visually connect and to help us to stay on track. So I want to share something before we go back to this, because a question that I want to talk about is, okay, Dave, that's great, but how do I get brand new people? I don't know if you've experienced this. So brand new people, you're talking about getting consumers engaged in this process. So how do you take these new people that are visiting your guests to your church? How do you on-ramp them into this process of apprenticing community? Well, a couple things that we do, and I'm just going to share how this has changed during COVID, to be honest with you, because that's the other layer we have to look through this. So every week we engage and we invite people from the platform, from the stage. Hey, if you're new, we're so glad you're here. We want to invite you to take a next step. If you have questions about how to take a next step, how to be a part of a community group, how to be a part of a ministry team, we have an information desk. We'd love to engage you. So we're always inviting people very intentionally to take that next step. Then every other month we used to call it a church chat. If you were familiar with Dave Page, when Dave Page was with the EFCA West, he would talk about the idea of a church chat, which was a newcomers gathering. And we used to do those on Sundays after our service. And we made a shift actually right before COVID, that we were going to, instead of doing a church chat, we started calling it Dinner with Dave and Julie. So in other words, here's an opportunity for new people to come on an evening. We cook dinner for them in an informal environment to meet others who are new and to meet my wife and I in this informal environment. So to connect new people. Well, obviously COVID happened, so things got shut down. So this last Tuesday, we had a dinner with Dave and Julie, and that dinner was digital. So people put in a communication card or a digital connection card, and we ordered pizza. We had pizza delivered to their home, and we did it via Zoom call. And I was a little skeptical of how that would work. I was worried I was hitting into the hokey land and kind of cheesy. But the last 2 that we've done digitally, every person that has been a part of those has gotten plugged in a community group. Everyone, 100%. I was incredibly encouraged with that. So whether you're still digital, I'll work on getting your pizza, Matt, at some point here. So whether it's digital or in person, you want to create a place where new people can on-ramp. And as part of that new gathering, whether you call it a church chat or a dinner with David, whatever you call it, just you want to share, here's our heartbeat, here's our mission, vision, our values. We would love for you to take a step in a community group. And I'll try to have some community group leaders there so that they can connect with them and just get them in a community group. The other really important piece, I can't say this enough, is part of this process, you standing on the stage telling people, hey, take a next step. You're the pastor. You're the big mouth with the mic. You get paid to say that. You have to say that. Where people will get engaged will be as if you have your ministry team members, which we'll talk about, if they are seeing new people, if they are personally inviting them. It's the personal invitation that is even more effective of getting people as part of that process. So part of our community groups, we tell our community group members, hey, you be looking for new people to invite. Don't just leave it for the community group leader to be inviting new people. You be looking for people that you can engage and invite. So it's everybody's a recruiter. It's not just your paid staff that are recruiting. It's your ministry team members recruiting. It's just creating a culture where everybody is inviting people to be a part of that. So, okay, I'm going to take a breath here. So let's talk about how we do that through, I'm going to put up the share screen again, and I want to show you this picture again, just to help. So you have folks, so a brand new person becomes a volunteer on a ministry team. Now, these categories on the top up here, you have leadership level, you have leadership position, then you have cultural values, and then these competencies that you see on the top, those came right out of the research that Lifeway did that said people that are growing and maturing spiritually, they demonstrate these characteristics, and they do a great job laying them out in transformational discipleship, that they have a personal engagement. They are engaged with the Bible. They are involved in spiritual disciplines, but they're also involved in community. They're also involved using their gifts. And they lay out these 8 different competencies that they see, and then they turn those into specifics. So how do you create environments where people can grow in those specific things? So for example, if you're a volunteer, so we'll use youth ministry because we always like to talk about youth pastors. I used to be a youth pastor, so I feel comfortable to talk about youth pastors. So if you have a volunteer in student ministry, well, you want them to understand, to embrace and carry out the values that you have as a church. That's why I spent some time talking about them. You want your volunteer to understand, hey, that we want to faithfully and lovingly proclaim the life-changing message of Jesus. We want to create irresistible, engaging environments with excellence, and we want to team up. You want them to understand that those values. And also, and this is the other piece. So the youth pastor, to use this example, he is discipling his volunteer staff. So the youth pastor, we think of small groups or community groups or Bible studies. The youth pastor is also going to be helping his volunteers on his team take responsibility for their relationship with Jesus. So he's going to be having conversations with his volunteers. How is your relationship with Jesus going? How can I help you with your relationship with Jesus? Not just, hey, how are you going to use your gifts, which is important, but how are you doing? Are you a part of a community group? What are some areas you're struggling? So there's this really apprenticing taking on. Then we want to make sure that they understand the vision of the ministry team. So at City Bible Church, our youth ministry is that we want to create space for junior and senior high students to come to know God, own their faith, and make their faith known. So does that volunteer staff understand that that's the vision of the team? We want to work on that volunteer staff, that they can serve as effectively as part of a team, that they understand that they're part of a team, that their gifts fit as a part of a team, and that they can collaborate, they can work well with other ministry team members, and that they demonstrate a willingness to grow, and that they faithfully manage their giftedness. So that's for a volunteer. So I'm going to share that. I'm going to stop sharing that because I want to go back to give you an idea how that works. So as part of, you have your youth pastor and you have your ministry team, volunteers, and you're like, are you in a community group? No, I'm not. Well, let me help you get in a community group. Our community groups, we follow very much, whether it's North Coast or North Point, we're very much a sermon-based model. And there's several reasons for that. They're inexpensive, they're free. Sermon-based community groups don't cost you anything. It costs you the time to write the questions, basically. And if you are the lead communicator, as I am, I've already done the sermon prep. I've done the sermon study. Hopefully my message, I have application as part of the message. And as part of that application, I take that application piece and I turn them into specific questions to be asked as part of the community group. So community group leaders have the opportunity, because I know we've all experienced this. We try to find a curriculum, and you're trying to find a curriculum that fits with the culture of your church. And that can be really hard. The benefit of sermon-based is you already know the culture of your church. You already know how this message is that you're communicating. And if you're coordinating with your lead pastor in the sermon series you're doing, you're addressing issues that the folks in your church need to do to grow spiritually. So you have that curriculum already there. It's just writing those questions for life change and application. And you can the other piece too, I don't have time, but I'll do this real quick. So I think in American Christianity, we get overwhelmed with content. So I had a conversation. This person said, Dave, I just don't feel like I'm being fed like I used to be here. And I said, really? Can you help unpack that? Well, I just don't feel. I said, so tell me about your week. What do you do? Oh, well, I work out a lot. So, I'm listening to podcasts. And I'm like, okay, so who you listen to? Oh, I listen to Craig Laurie on Monday. Then on Tuesday, I'm listening to Andy Stanley. And on Wednesday, I'm listening to this. And I'm like, so you're listening to like 8 podcasts a week, is what you just described. Yeah. I said, could it be you're not applying a single thing, that you're just getting content, but you're not taking enough time to let that content sink in and apply it? And the person looked at me like, you know what, you're right. I'm just blowing through content without taking the time to ask how to apply any of that. So the benefit of a sermon-based community group is you can take a timeless truth from the sermon and you can just drill down on it in a community group of how that applies for the whole week. So you're just really, you're helping people move it from the head to the heart to the hands. So we are sermon based. The other piece about it is it's easy to equip and empower and unleash volunteers to lead community groups. So to give you a little backstory, almost every one of our community groups came out of a community group that my wife and I led. In other words, we developed new community group leaders, and then they started community groups. So 85% of our community groups at church were reproduced from community groups already existing within the church. So what those community group leaders do is I preach a sermon. I have my sermon notes. I've manuscripted my sermon. All the community group leaders get them in an email or in their inbox. So they already have all the study materials. They've already sat and listened to the sermon. They have an opportunity to interact and ask me questions. So it's easier to equip and empower them. For the community group leaders, it just works better for them in their time, and they're being discipled as well. So that's the process we use. And so how do we develop? How do we reproduce community groups? Because that's part of it. So we started a community group in 2010. It was called Home Builders. It was parent focused because we had a lot of young families. And we quickly saw a couple young families, a couple people that demonstrated a desire to grow. And what ended up happening, this short story, is like, hey, would you lead the community group next week? Because you've been watching me lead. How about you lead? And I started intentionally saying, hey, how do you think community group went? And they would say, I thought this went really well. I thought this could be better. Okay. So how would you have done that differently? Well, I would have tried this. Yeah, that's a good idea. So eventually they watched me. Then they'd give me feedback. We talk about how I did. Then it would be, hey, I'm going to be out. I'm not going to have time to prepare. Would you lead the community group? I'll be there, but you lead it. So they would lead with me there. And then we'd talk about how they did. Then eventually I would be out of town. They would lead without me. And then we would give feedback. How did that go? And then eventually they were ready to go and launch their own group. So that's how the vast majority of our groups reproduced. So that's on community groups. Let's talk about ministry teams real quick, because I have about 7 minutes, and then I want to open it up to questions because I know I'm going really, really fast. So like our community groups, we want to create a constant culture of recruitment and investment. So we talk about investing every week about our goals that everyone's a part of a ministry team. And then every Sunday, well, not every Sunday, one Sunday a year, we have a ministry team fair. I'm sure others of you have done that, where you kind of put out your ministry team leaders out in your foyer or in your gathering area, and you just create opportunities on a one particular Sunday with that emphasis. But what we have found is more successful is when individual members of ministry teams are developing relationships with people that are not a part of the ministry team, and they invite them to be a part of the team. So our process is, if a person comes and wants to be a part of a ministry team, we ask them to fill out, we have one application. So yes, we do require ministry leaders to be in a community group. This is an important point. So here's how this works. Every community group, the community group leader is asking those who are in a community group, hey, are you on a ministry team? No, I'm not. Well, let me help you find one. Then every ministry team, the ministry team leader is asking, are you a part of a community group? No. Well, let me help you find one. So there's recruitment both ways. So it's not a either or, it's a both and I can't express this enough. People that grow like spiritual weeds at our church, I see it in them serving on a ministry team, even more than in a community group. As powerful as community groups are, I can't tell you how many conversations where it's like, Dave, you wouldn't believe I was serving with this student and all of a sudden they asked this question, we had this conversation, they made this decision, and I felt like, man, I was a part of what God's doing. I'm like, yes, that spiritual growth is not just a head and it's not just the hands, it's both together. So you really want to create that environment where your community group leaders are recruiting for ministry teams and your ministry teams are recruiting for community groups. So that's a great question. So you want to have a single application that works for every ministry team, because people that you're trying to get as part of the apprenticeship community, if they have to fill out a ministry application for every single ministry team, they're going to get really frustrated and they're not going to want to do that. So we have one ministry application, and that one ministry application comes through, and part of the application, your usual stuff you have to have is, well, what ministry team are you interested in? And that person will say, well, I'm interested in children's ministry. Great. So they would meet with our children's ministry team leader and just have a conversation, get to know one another, and say the person says, well, I want to be a part of your Sunday morning children's ministry. Great. Come next Sunday. Well, don't I have to go through a class first? No, we want you to come next Sunday. We just want you to watch. We don't want you to do anything. We want you to watch. Watch how we do things. And then that person can watch and go, oh, okay. Yeah, that's how they do this. I see how this works. Then there's a follow-up conversation. What are you interested in? Oh, I'm not ready to teach yet, but I'd like to help lead that small group. Okay, come next Sunday and just watch how that small group leader leads. One of two things is going to happen. Either that potential volunteer is going to say, yeah, I totally love that. Or they're going to say, no, I'm not really interested in that anymore. And if they say they're not interested, great. Where can I point you that you can serve? Because I think sometimes volunteers get frustrated. You make them sit in a class for 4 weeks, you train them, and then they jump in to serve and they don't like it. And they feel like I wasted 4 weeks of my time. This way, put them right in, and then let them see if that's what they're interested in. If they feel that connection. If they're like, yes, then we immediately take a more experienced person that's a volunteer on that team and to start apprenticing them. So we never just, oh, you want to be a small group leader? We're going to throw you in by yourself with a group of kids to be a small group leader. No, I want you to work with this existing small group leader and to team together to work. So that existing small group leader starts teaching, they watch them teach, then they start teaching together. Then that person starts teaching, the person that was teaching starts backing away. And then that person starts taking over teaching. Because here's the other thing that's happening. That other small group leader, they may be being apprenticed by the ministry team leader because that ministry team leader sees that small group leader as a person that could eventually take their position. Does that make sense? So going back to that pipeline real quick, the goal is not to make everybody go from volunteer to senior leadership. The goal is to take people that volunteer and to get them to the best place where God has wired them. That could be as a volunteer. They may never move past a volunteer to a ministry team leader. They may never move past there. But some will. And there's a difference between the responsibilities that a ministry team leader has and a volunteer. And some of your ministry team leaders may move to be where they become on paid staff, for example. And some of those may continue on that journey where they could be an elder, or deacon, or deaconess. So in 2 minutes, I'm going to try to share with you the differences. The other thing that we have is for each position, I'm going to use 2 words, but one word is job description, but we don't call it a job description, but sometimes people resonate with that. It's a roles and responsibility. So if the volunteer that's a small group leader, they would meet with their their person that's apprenticing them and say, here's your roles and responsibilities. And there's 8 different parts of that roles and responsibility, but 7 of those 8 pieces come from this discipleship piece. So for example, the small group leader, part of your role is to make sure you embrace and understand the values that we have for Kids Connection, which is our children's ministry. We want to make sure that your responsibility is that you're taking responsibility for your relationship with Jesus. So you need to be a part of a community group. You know, part of your role and responsibility is that you understand and support the vision of Kids Connection. Part of the responsibility is that you work well with your other Kids Connection team members. Part of it is that you work, that you can collaborate and work well with them, and that you demonstrate a willingness to grow, and that you're faithfully managing your personal giftedness. And then the 8th one is specific for that role. Does that make sense? So 7 of the 8 roles and responsibilities are about discipleship, or about spiritual growth. Only the last one, 8, involves how you would say specific core competencies, like coming prepared and clearly communicating and those sort of things. As a ministry team leader, so the ministry team leaders training as volunteers by having monthly staff meetings and going over those core competencies. Real quick, so the question is, Dave, well, how do you train your ministry team leaders? So you identify people that are ministry team leaders. They also have roles and responsibilities, but notice the difference. Whereas a volunteer embraces and carries out those cultural values, the ministry team leader's responsibility to communicate and instill those cultural values into their volunteers. Where the volunteer is taking responsibility for their relationship with Jesus, the ministry team leader needs to demonstrate a growing and engaged relationship with Jesus that's becoming more like Jesus so that they can pull people on. Whereas a volunteer supports the mission, well, the ministry team leader, they have to communicate and implement that vision. Do you see the difference? Where the biggest hiccup comes in is we will take a volunteer and say they should be a ministry team leader, and they become a ministry team leader, but they want to do everything instead of empowering others to do everything. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, you put a person in a ministry team leader, well, they're not working through the ministry team members. They're still trying to do all the work of the ministry. So that's the biggest hiccup that happens on this developing leaders, is that the ministry team leader thinks that they still have to do everything when they need to make the shift to understand, no, you are equipping and empowering those under you to do everything. And that's a huge difference. So they work through the ministry team members and they create a pathway for growth. So 2 words, I've used the word pipeline and pathway. This is the pipeline. This picture is a pipeline. The pathway is an individual plan for each person that's being apprenticed by the ministry team leader. So the components will be the same. Hey, be a part of a community group. But a pathway for one will be different than a pathway for another. We have a person that works in our fusion. I love her. She is just like a junior hire. And I put that in the most positive way. She will never be teaching a lesson. She will never be a ministry team leader. But she is growing in her relationship with Jesus. She's becoming more like Jesus, and she's using her gifts. She's in the right place on the pipeline. Her pathway looks very different from someone that maybe has the potential to be a ministry team leader. I hope that makes sense. Then if you go up the next level, so you have a ministry team leader. We had a person on our staff named Christy who was a ministry team leader who we brought on staff at one point. Well, her job changed. Her roles and responsibilities moved up. In other words, she was now guarding those cultural values. So she would communicate them to the ministry team leader she supervised. She would understand and apply theology and teach the disciplines to make sure that was in the entire ministry division. She would contextualize and cast the vision for the specific ministry. She would design and implement strategy. She would work through her ministry team leaders. And then she would create a pathway for ministry team leaders and she would manage resources within a division. If that person moves to where they can be in senior leadership, then there's a next set of level. And there is a ton more I could cover, but I want to have questions. And I know you guys are really smart folks that you can read those notes, because I talk about specifically how we develop elders, deacons, and deaconesses. Our senior leadership in 1 minute is they go through a 1-year process. If you're an elder, you go through Biblical Eldership by Alexander Strock, the book and the workbook, while you meet kind of with other elders and with myself. And about halfway through the process, you start going to elder meetings. You start being a part of the leadership meeting just as an observer. We're watching your character. We're praying, you're praying. And if you go through that process and it works good, we're an elder-led congregational affirmed church. So 8 weeks before our annual meeting, we put up the qualifications for an elder. Is there any reason why Joe shouldn't be an elder biblically? And if the answer is no in that 8 weeks, then they become an elder. And then those elders, my responsibility is to train the elders, the deacons, the deaconesses, and the ministry team leaders. So at City Bible Church, that's who I'm apprenticing, is that group. So the average person, I want to go up coffee. I want that if I can, but that is not my primary focus. My primary focus is our elders, deacons, deaconesses, ministry team leaders, community group leaders, discipling, apprenticing them so that they can disciple and apprentice those underneath. Okay. I know I went really fast. Forgive me if I lost in that. So let me look at some questions here. When or where does membership happen in your model? So we have, that's a great question that I forgot to talk about. So we have those onboarding. And one of the things that we talk about in their dinner with Dave and Julie is that every other month, on the opposite months from when we have the digital dinner with Dave and Julie or the dinner with Dave and Julie, we have a intro to City Bible Church class, which is our partnership class. We intentionally use the word partner and not membership because we want to clearly communicate that the issue isn't being a member, because if you have a relationship with Jesus, Paul's very clear, you're a member of the body of Christ. And 1 Corinthians chapter 12 through 14 is the Apostle Paul chastising the church because they're all members of the body of Christ, but they weren't partnering. They weren't doing anything. They were not engaged. They were misusing their spiritual gifts. I mean, he has to write 1 Corinthians 13 because they were misusing their gifts. So we want to clearly communicate that the issue is we want you to partner with us. We don't want you to be a member. We want you to be a partner. So that's every other month. And it's a 3-hour class that we do one time. And we share the apprenticing community. And hopefully by then, folks are already in a community group and serving. Hopefully we've already got them in that process. So that's a great question. Is it a requirement for ministry leaders to be in a community group? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Because you can't lead people past where you are. One of the most haunting verses for me is Luke 6:40. Disciple's not above his teacher, but every disciple will be just like his teacher. You cannot lead people past where you're at. Just lost his name. The law of the lid. John Maxwell, the law of the lid. You can't lead people past that. So yes, be in a community group. How are elder candidates selected? We use, for example, here's what I want to see. Normally what happens, a person becomes a part of a ministry team, they're part of a community group, they're growing. And those folks, you start noticing them. Other people start noticing them. Wow, do you see the servant's heart Joe has? Do you see how he's always jumping in to help? Yeah, I sure do. Boy, he's doing really good. I'm thinking about apprenticing him to take over the First Impressions team. Great, do that. So Joe gets apprenticed. He's a part of the First Impressions team. You're starting to see him lead other people. You see people following Joe. And you see him, and now he's a part of the ministry team leaders meetings. And he's growing and he's maturing. And those things are happening. And you start seeing this character in him. You start observing his family, how he treats people. And then all of a sudden, as elders, you're having a conversation. You see Joe? Do you like what you see with Joe? Should we approach Joe? Yeah, let's approach Joe. And then we approach Joe, ask him to pray about it. Then he begins that process. So actually, that's how that pipeline works. Just every one of our leaders, as I look back, they started a community group, they started in a ministry team, they demonstrate, you see the fruit of the Spirit, you see just people following them, you see their servant's attitude, you see humility, you start seeing those characteristics in 1 Timothy chapter 3 being demonstrated, which is I want to be careful how I say this. The idea of like, hey, I'm not against having committees that give you people that they think should be elders, but I just love this process so much better because you're it's going through that natural process, because every spiritually mature person should be a leader, but not every spiritually mature person can be a leader, but not every spiritually mature person will be a leader, because 1 Timothy, they have to have that passion to be that. Do I think Moses knew what he was doing with Joshua? The Bible's is silent on that. But there's two things about Moses the Bible does say. He was the most humble person that ever lived. Numbers chapter 11 or 12, I believe it's in there. And he constantly had a heart to include Joshua. I mean, he had a heart to include him. I mean, we've all experienced leaders who are like, I don't want that guy around me. He wasn't jealous of Joshua. He didn't keep Joshua at arm's length. He invited him in. So I have to think he may not have totally realized that Joshua was the next guy, but I think he was, and I don't think he had the language of discipleship, but I think that's exactly what he was doing. Let's see. Have you ever had to ask someone to step down from volunteering? How did you approach that conversation? Yes, we have. And I actually have had to have that conversation with a volunteer. I've had to have that conversation with a ministry team leader, and I've had to have that conversation, and I'm probably going to have that conversation with one of our deacons, to be honest with you. So that conversation has happened. How do you go about it is basically to say, let's talk about, here's what happens. We're a very transient community. So we have a deaconess who has already said, hey, I'm only going to be here half time because I'm going to be spending 6 or 7 months in Michigan. And then I'm going to be, well, at some point, how can you lead as a servant leader? How can you stay in touch with what's happening if you're not here? So usually I'll have the conversation by asking a series of questions. How's it going as you're volunteering here? And let them, and inevitably, I think if you just ask that question, they know it's not going well. Most volunteers that are serving, they know it's not going well, usually. And it's like, so how, the tenor I want to take is, how can I help you be successful? You don't feel like you're being successful. You're frustrated. I sense that frustration. I sense other ministry team leaders and members frustrated. How can we help you be successful? And just try to create an ongoing conversation. What do you think would be a better fit? Now, here's what I would say is really important about those job descriptions or roles and responsibilities, because every person, so if I have to ask a ministry team leader to step down, the conversation is, remember we agreed to these roles and responsibilities. Remember we talked about that these are important. Remember you signed off on that. Remember we talked, we'd follow up. How do you think you're doing with number 6? Because remember, you committed to that. And we never want to ask you, we don't want to ask you to commit to more than you can commit to. But we want you to be faithful to what you've committed to. That's why every word in our cultural values is faithfully. Faithfully, faithfully, faithfully. We want to navigate the tension of never asking people to commit to more than they can commit to, and we never want to guilt. Guilt is a horrible motivator. If you're standing up trying to guilt people to serve on a ministry team, it's not going to work long term. You want to invite them to be, we have an opportunity. So we never use the word need. I may use it in my office with other ministry team leaders, like, we need this. And then I'll say, well, here's an opportunity. You have an opportunity to be part of what God is doing. And you can say that's semantic gymnastics, and it may be, but folks, they see through guilt. They see through the guilt, shame recruiting. They see through kind of need. But if you talk about an opportunity and you couch it in the terms of this is about you growing in your relationship with Jesus. I mean, I stole this from Andy Stanley. I say this over and over. We ask you to do these things not because we want something from you. We want something for you. We want you to experience what Jesus and the authors of the New Testament of the Bible talk about this vibrant, growing relationship with Jesus, where you're being used by Jesus to impact other people from Jesus. That's what we want for you. And right now, it doesn't feel like that's happening. So how can we help you? And we've moved people. Like someone thought they were good with kids. They were horrible with kids, just horrible. Now they're serving actually in our clean and shine team. They love cleaning. So again, back to Jim Collins, it's getting everyone on the bus, but then getting them on the right seats on the bus. And as a ministry team leader, and my role as pastor is to make sure that I have the right elders, deacons, and deaconesses on the right seats on the bus, and that we have the right ministry team leaders, and that I'm coaching them. And I didn't have a chance to talk about this, but they're in the notes. I meet quarterly with our ministry team leaders, and we have a specific things that we go over to equip and empower them. Does that make sense? So do elders have terms? We call elder teams. We don't use board because we wanted to emphasize team as a cultural value. We do things as teams. So is there a set size? No. I would love to have, obviously you can't have too many in a room making decisions. That makes it hard. But I would love to because if you have too many elders, if you have too many people that are qualified to be an elder, you are discipling people. You have a great problem. I want to meet you. Because if you have too many people that are equipped and empowered and have the character and competency to be an elder, man, you're killing it. You should be teaching this. Seriously. Because that is, now, practically, you can't have 20 people around a room trying to make a decision. So we're elder-led congregation affirmed. And the way our Constitution is written, ministry team leaders and elders make the vast majority of the big decisions, unless it's over $10,000 or unless it's a major change in vision or direction. So, we talk about all the time. I am an elder who they pay. I rarely call myself a pastor. Most people say, do I call you? I said, just call me Dave. Let's just talk about that. But technically speaking, I function as the first among equals among the elders on a practical level. Right now, and just to be transparent, one of the tensions we have as a church is we're a very transient area. And in the last 3 years, we went from 6 elders to 1 elder because one passed away and the rest have retired and decided to move somewhere other than Bullhead City. So, when I'm talking about this, we're living this out right now, developing new leaders, and we're in that right now. I just had a conversation last week. We have a deacon that runs our emergency assistance window that's getting ready to move. He does such an amazing job. And it's like, but here's the thing, to his credit, he has been apprenticing someone. He has done this process we're talking about, and that person's going to take over. It's going to be seamless. It's already seamless. And the ministries that struggle doing this, they struggle. So it's not perfect here, but the ministries that have really embraced this, they're doing great. The ones that don't have struggled more. So what's our composition of our staff? So we have right now, I'm the only pastoral staff. We have one person, Sherry Smith, who's our director of ministries, who, by the way, is transitioning out. Bob, just to let you know that. So another transit. So she's transitioning to a half-time role. And we're going to, so small church folks, just to encourage you, Belay Solutions. We're going to hire a digital bookkeeper to do that finance piece that Sherry handled. And Sherry's going to go half-time to do more your traditional church secretary. But we're right here. So we were pre-COVID, we were a church about 250 to 300. Since COVID, we've been averaging about 80 to 90, just for a variety of reasons. but that's kind of, so we have, I'm the full-time paid staff. We're going to have a half-time church secretary, for lack of a better word, by the end of this month. And then we have a half-time emergency assistants. So we're very lean paid staff. Everything is volunteer. So that's why all my time is with volunteers, is pouring into them and equipping them, which means my schedule looks very different. My Sunday is a 16-hour day because I'm having meetings with ministry team leaders and ministry on Sunday afternoon. We have a 10 a.m. and a 5 p.m. right now. So my afternoons is meeting with volunteer ministry team leaders because they work during the week. So my schedule is very different. And I'll just get ahead of this. The hardest thing to do as a lead pastor in this is, the temptation is I just want to be with people and have coffee with everybody. And in this kind of a system, again, Andy Stanley, I take it. The reason people love our church is the reason why I can't go have coffee with everybody. Because the reason why our staff is so lean, but we're able to do so much is because, and the elders and our leadership team has been great about freeing me up to say, you need to focus on these things. And we don't do a lot of counseling because before COVID, about 65% of our people were in a community group, 65% of our average adult attendance. So a lot of those issues that become pastoral counseling, they get dealt in community group before they get out of control, which is a huge thing. If you're equipping your community group leaders, they can handle a lot of those little things and then filter the big things. And then that's very helpful as well. So I'm going to put my email on here for you guys. And then the notes are on the associates, put them on there. If you want to go to sleep, if you want to be able to take a nap, I have a dissertation. This was my doctoral dissertation, was on apprenticing community. So if you want to read 162 pages of this, I'd be more than willing to share that, because again, if this can help you guys, if this can help you take that next step, we want to be able to do that. I feel like one of the reasons I love EFCA West and I love the leadership and the team. Skip the literature review, although it's pretty fascinating. One of the things I love about EFCA West is this spirit of cooperation, not competition. I just so love that. I can't tell you personally, in our 10, 11 years at church, there has not been a single time where I have called and requested help from EFCA that within a day I had a response. And that I just love these guys. I can't tell you enough how supportive they've been and how helpful. And if there's any way I can help you, let me know. So thank you so much. I know it's 11:03, so I went over 3 minutes, so I apologize. I want to honor your time. Bob, is there anything?
Yeah. Wow, Dave, thank you so much. Even at 1.5% speed, I think we captured a whole lot of stuff. Thanks for your notes. I did read the 162-page version, and that's one of the reasons Dave Arnold is giving this presentation. It's so good. Hey, if you, like me, hear something like this and you look at the documents and you go, oh, that's way too much work, it just reminds me of every time I painted my house. When I didn't lay the foundation with all that prep work that I don't like doing, the results are evident after the outer coat of paint's been slapped on. I just really encourage you to look at this stuff. City Bible Church is killing it. They're doing it in a very transparent, God-honoring way. And just, one of the things I love about what Dave's done here is he's just underscored that thing where we know it, but we don't want to believe that systems are required to enable us to live out our good intentions. We all have great intentions of developing leaders, but without a system, typically we fall apart. Thanks so much, Dave. 1 o'clock this afternoon, I'll be facilitating along with my partner, Tracy Moss. our last English language workshop for the day, a new season for church boards and staff members. We'll be talking about some of the adjustments and changes we may need to do to maximize our effectiveness as we move into this new season that's ahead of us that we don't really know all that much about yet. For those of you who are able to habla español, our final session will be at 5 o'clock Pacific, 6 o'clock Mountain Time, led by Alex, and he has several other speakers with him. And that'll be at 5 o'clock Pacific, again, 6 o'clock Mountain Time in Spanish. Thanks for being with us. Stay connected with us. If you go to efcawest.org, you'll end up on our webpage, and you'll be able to see get access to podcasts, handouts, just all kinds of stuff. Our first Wednesday of the month workshop that we do on Zoom is always interesting. There's just so much that's going on. We just posted 2 learning cohorts, one for board members and one for what we're calling mid-level leaders that you can find when you get to that website as well. So lots of good stuff going on. We love you. We want to serve leaders in churches. So thanks for being with us. And I look forward to seeing you all at 1 o'clock this afternoon, my time on the Pacific Coast, 2 o'clock for those of you in the Mountain Zone. God bless you. Take care.